Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hammer Territory podcast, part of the Foul Territory Network. I am your host, Brad Rowland, and I'm joined by someone on this podcast that is very familiar to Braves fans and people that, I guess, podcast that I host in some respects. He is a subject matter expert on this topic. He is Carlos Collazo of Baseball America. Hello, sir. How are you?
What's up, Brad? How's it going, man? Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I always appreciate you doing this. I try not to bug you more than once a year in podcast fashion, and I try not to do it like the day before the draft because that way you probably have 100 things to do that day. So here we are.
Yeah.
People probably know you, but this is what you do. You're a legitimate MLB draft expert. You'll be, I believe, on the first night of the draft on the TV side. You're a TV star for one day a year.
I don't know about star, but I'm at least on TV for one day a year, and I do cover the draft at BA. So excited for this time of year. Yeah, it is funny the amount of people who I never hear from who will like hit me up the day of the draft and ask if I can do a radio hit. I'm like, no.
I'm very busy today. Yeah. I hesitated to even ask you when I did because I was like, it's probably a little bit late, but I'll try my best. I know you did Friends of Ours, the Peach State Prospects podcast. I listened to you on that show with Gaurav and those guys. That was fun. So
and this is my first appearance on the pod since you guys have moved over to the Foul Territory Network. So that's awesome.
True. I was going to say I have to do the spiel every time you come on. Carlos and I actually founded the Battery Power podcast before it was Talking Chop before that, and now it's the same crew, but we're on a new feed, so it's kind of the same show. But yeah, this is your debut on Hammer Territory anyway. Although I know you've been on Foul Territory a few times. I saw you were on there for the Combine a couple weeks ago, live on video and all those things. And I mean, my debut recently on Foul Territory, and probably messed it up. I don't know.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, they do a show with us called Hot Sheet that happens weekly. That's really fun. So love those guys and glad to see you a part of the network. So that's cool.
Absolutely. We're having fun. So anyway, we'll get to the specifics a little bit here. I always admit this, but I'll say it on the show. I know very little about the MLB draft, which is why I'm getting someone who does know on something about this. So this is not an area where I'm going to inject much of my own opinion. I don't really have opinions at this point in time, but just to lay the groundwork, the draft is this Sunday as people are about to listen to this podcast. The first two rounds is, the first day of the draft is Sunday. The first day is the first two full rounds plus the first two comp rounds. The Braves have two picks in that first day. I think it's 24 and 62. Yeah, that's right. And their bonus pool was like $7.7-ish million. MLB draft is weird. It's always different than other drafts when you think about it. You're laughing as I'm saying that. It just is. But let's just do the top guys first that are not Braves targets, because they're obviously famous players. There's a local product. I think is it Charlie? Is it Con? It's Charlie Condon, right? It's like he's like maybe like not necessarily a consensus number one, but he's kind of up there on all the lists. What do you think about the top of the draft? The more famous players that the Braves can't have access to in this class.
Yeah, I think the top of the draft is actually quite good. I've had a few scouts tell me that if this draft was like a 10-player draft, it'd be a really good draft, but because it's not, most people don't think it's that good. I think the class as a whole is probably below average. It might be the weakest draft that I've covered since I joined BA, which is going back to like the 2017 draft. But the top 10 players is actually quite solid. Charlie Condon, who you mentioned, is number one on our board. I think throughout the industry, he is a consensus top 2 player in the class. If you don't have Charlie Condon number one, most other people have Travis Bazzana, Oregon State second baseman number one. We've got those guys 1, 2 with Condon 1. But yeah, he's had a monstrous offensive season. He added a lot of defensive versatility to his profile, which really helped improve it. But if you're taking Condon 1, you're taking him because of the bat. It's a potential plus hit tool with 70 grade power upside. He's going to set a number of records just given the offensive environment in college baseball this year and the phenomenal season he had. I think he's got a chance to be the first Power 5 conference hitter in the bonus pool era to go in the first round with a career average over 400. He'll have like the best slugging percentage of any of these players. He'll have the best home run rate for any players in this kind of era of baseball. So he has pretty exceptional numbers, but I think there are real tools behind it. And the fact that he's kind of ran out there and played center field and played third and looked decent in college makes his profile quite appealing, I would say.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the class in general because, there's always this actually happened to me recently with the NBA draft, where there's always this okay, what makes a good draft between the top talent and the depth of the class, and the way you got into it. It sounds like there's not a lot of depth in this class, but the top talent's there. It was the exact opposite in the NBA draft. Not that anybody cares, but there was just no top guys in the NBA draft, so it's like almost philosophical. Like if you have a top 5 pick, it seems like you're probably in pretty good shape. The Braves don't, of course, but does that sound reasonable? It's just top heavy. Is that all it is?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because this year's top tier is not as good as last year's top five. Like the 2023 class, I think all of those five players would have a chance to rank number one in this class still. But the 2023 draft is like the best draft I've ever covered, and I think part of it is just the biggest reason this draft is considered weak for most scouts is the high school class is really weak, both on the hitting and pitching side. And I think specifically for the high school class, it's a lack of top end hitters and pitchers, like you mentioned. I think for most classes, teams would really prefer it to be top heavy and to have some real studs at the top of the class that you can feel confident in. Because, I mean, the 2019 draft is one that I always point to. At the time, scouts really hammered the depth of that class, but there was a really strong top six. Adley Rutschman and Bobby Witt Jr. have been great. And looking back now, that 2019 class is much better in hindsight than scouts thought it was the day of. So maybe this 24 class is going to be the same, where it kind of gets hammered at the time we're all covering it and watching it, but there are going to be players that pan out. I do think there's some like reasonable depth on the high school pitching side. There are not too many organizations that have really tried to dive into that demographic. The Braves are one of those organizations that has, so maybe that'll benefit them. But I think the biggest thing for this class that makes it challenging is there's a pretty significant drop off in talent after this top 10 or 11 tier of players. And every team that I've talked to, picking in kind of the middle of the first round and back third, has just massive nets that they've casted because they have no idea who's available. And it's very difficult to separate this next tier of like 40 players or so. So I think it's going to be pretty chaotic on draft day, which will be fun for people watching and maybe for people who are following teams picking lower because who knows who's going to be available to you this year.
Yeah, again, acknowledging my amateur status here. It seems like maybe you get some guys that might fall, and maybe some considerations of bonus pool stuff, and you're drafting guys for how much they're going to take, and that always happens. But is that even more so this time around? Once you get past that top 10, like the guys fall that maybe by money
Yeah,
wise, like you're trying to scheme this whole thing.
I think so. And I think that could even happen like inside the top 10. One of the big things that teams are grappling with this year is the fact that the bonus pools have risen, I think it's 8.7% year over year. So the pools are massive this year. There are three slot values, like the top three picks have slot values of 9 million or higher. We only handed out our first $9 million bonus last year in the draft with Paul Skeens and Dylan Cruz. And I can't imagine the industry is going to be paying any one slot value for 1-1, which is 10.5 million, which would shatter the amateur bonus pool record. So I know there is a thought in the industry that like this year's talent is just not worth the bonus pools. So if that underslotting starts inside the top 10 picks, a lot of players are going to slide down boards. A majority of the players who are signed in the first round over the last few years are on underslot deals at this point because so many teams just like using that portfolio approach in the draft. So that could lead to some guys who, in my mind, I'm thinking are going to be gone by the 12th to 13th pick sliding a little bit further. It happens every year, but it's just hard to predict who those players are going to be and who's going to jump up into that top 10 range on a deal that we're not expecting. So someone will do it. But yeah, this year I'll be very interested to see just how many actual slot value deals or overslot deals we have in the first round.
I want to get your thoughts on the Braves, of course. Last year they went kind of, actually they picked their, I think, right-handed pitchers from college with their first three picks, and I think seven of their first 10. I don't know if that means anything. There's been this turnover the last from years back. This is not new this year, but they have a different leadership structure. Obviously, this is broad, and it's hard to pinpoint who they're going to take at 24, especially 62. It's like I don't envy you trying to do mock drafts in a draft like this. Just putting that behind the that's not a consideration for anybody else. But I've had to do mock drafts. They're not a lot of fun, especially when there's like uncertainty. But what do you, as far as what you know about the Braves, like where are you kind of looking? What do they seem to value? Because the year before, just in contrast, I know they went more prep heavy 2 years ago. Like, so where's kind of the radar with the Braves right now?
Yeah, I feel like they're one of these teams that definitely has become a little bit more model heavy. Analytics have certainly become more of a factor over the years, but the fact that they're still willing to take profiles that they have a track record of developing at a pretty good level, I think above the industry norm, the fact that they're still willing to take some of these high school pitching profiles just makes them like you can't lump, I don't lump them entirely in with like the Clevelands or the Torontos and Seattles who seem to be, or maybe Milwaukee, who seem to be like super model heavy and super analytically friendly. So they're kind of this blended scouting department from my point of view. They're also picking in a range where really, I think every demographic of the draft is going to be on the table and available. I think mostly college hitters will be the best players available for the Braves. If they want to go high school pitching, I think there are a number of high school pitchers who make sense in the 20s. So far during this like mock draft process and over the last few weeks, I've heard them mostly tied to college players, guys like Ryan Waldschmidt, who I think we've had them mocked at the last three mocks. And I try to really hammer this over and over again that like the fact that he has been there for three straight does not mean that I'm like ultra confident. It's just a name that I have heard them linked to and I've heard they like, and he makes sense on talent. And so without like a better option to fit with them, I think he's just like a name in this range that I know or I've heard that they do like. So he kind of just is the pick. Other guys like Durangelo Cincha, who's a switch pitcher from Mississippi State, Carson Bench, who is an outfielder and right-handed pitcher, which maybe I should just be finding two-way players to tie to the Braves in the 20s because they've really taken that profile a lot. But both those guys, if they're available, I think they can make a lot of sense. But I feel like there's reasonable odds that both those two are gone. Even Waldschmidt might be gone before they pick at 24, 25. So it's really tough, like you said. And it's tough this year at 15 to find like realistic matches for teams, just given the uncertainty. But for the Braves, like, yeah, I just mostly hear college names, college players. I would like to see them draft a hitter personally, just as someone who still covers the system, just because there's not a lot of like locked in hitters you feel good about in this system. At the same time, they still keep pushing up pitchers and they've had some pitching injuries. And if you get a talent deal like a Hurston Waldrop, the fact that he signed an underslot deal last year at that pick, I thought was crazy good value. So it's really hard to eliminate anything entirely.
Yeah, and this is very obvious to most people, I think, but you don't draft for like need in the baseball draft. Like it's like especially nor do you like cross positions off because you have a guy in the majors either. It's like it's very different from NFL or NBA in that way. You're kind of just taking best available. But
Yeah.
I'm curious because you mentioned, the system. I'm not going to make you talk about the system a ton if you don't want to, but it's like it's not where it was a few years ago. Kind of everybody knows that, and that leads to questions that we get all the time, like what are they going to do in the draft? What are they trying to do with the farm system in general? And it's like, well, they're just trying to add talent for the most part. And like you mentioned they're not shy about pushing guys fast. Like they did it again this year. They're going to do it again in the future. Like they're not afraid to do that. Doesn't mean that this guy, whoever they take, is going to appear in the majors soon, but Waldrop's already like been up there. Like it's crazy fast, even as a college player to get there as fast as that. Is that a consideration? Is that why they like college guys? Do they want to move fast? Like, do you have any idea why they would kind of value what they value? Like, what do they not value? I don't know. It's interesting to me that they're kind of going such fluid. It'd probably be easier for people like you if you kind of knew more, like if they were more obvious, but it's also kind of on brand for the Braves. They don't like to showcase what they're going to do in any possible way. They're very private. So it doesn't, I'm not shocked what you said.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think that is like more of maybe a player development philosophy with the Braves. There are some teams who really are trying to kind of baby their arms specifically and put these innings limits and pitch count limits and really try and help their pitchers avoid injury by not overtaxing them. It does seem like the Braves philosophy is like, no, we want our guys to throw. They need to get used to the volume. They need to pitch a lot. And I think there's a lot of merit to that philosophy. Actually, I don't really love the idea of like babying arms. We've seen so many teams who have tried to do this with prominent prospects and it just doesn't work. So I'm much more of I like the idea of training volume in pitchers and getting the arm used to that volume. I think it's solid. Like you said, they're one of the more aggressive teams in pushing prospects. They're not afraid to challenge them at upper levels of the minors and push them quickly. There are other teams like the Rays who seem to be a lot more conservative with how fast they push their prospects in general, but the Rays still have a really good track record in player development in general. So I think that player development philosophy is interesting in terms of like what the Braves target in terms of pitch traits. I'm not sure that I have a great read on if they have anything really specific. Like I know teams like Cleveland really value vertical break fastballs. Teams like the Mariners really value like vertical approach angle with pitchers. They want really flat approach angle. For the guys they're taking. They've actually been more willing to take on sinkers in the past. I don't know if there's like a specific pitch trait the Braves, like I see them taking a lot of. I think they do a reasonable job of just taking whoever the best player available is and not kind of getting too in the weeds on like specific traits, which I think is probably a good thing.
So I again, not knowing anything, that generally applies what it would be what I want people to do. Like I want them to take the best player available, kind of whatever the mix happens to be, especially at that, you're not picking one, you're picking 24, 62. Like you can be kind of wide ranging with what you want. And I know Waldrop was like a dream for a lot of people that I talked to last year, and they ended up getting him. And like you mentioned, signing him under slot, that was like a great scenario that everybody was on board with. It's not always that, like, there's not always consensus, like, excitement around every pick that you make, but maybe a little bit of spoiled there, given that everyone was really excited about him.
Yeah, I think it's also just a good sign for the Braves too, because there are some organizations where pitchers specifically are not going to want to take deals. I think it's a credit to what Atlanta has done with their pitching development, and just the fact that they're a competitive team at the major league level, that players are willing to take a deal to go to them. Because I don't imagine that that would have been the same deal that any team picking him in that spot would have gotten. I know for other teams like Colorado and Oakland specifically, like a lot of times the asking prices may be higher than some of the other teams on either side. So it certainly helps to have just established yourself as a solid team in all phases. And the Braves, I would put them in the upper tier of big league teams in general. So that's good. But yeah, in terms of figuring out who they're going to draft this year, it's anyone's guess.
I can't imagine why a pitcher in particular would not like to go to Colorado or Oakland right now. That'd be very surprising. I'll ask you this: what would surprise you with what they do? Like, is there like a not necessarily a player, but like, is there like a grouping, of type of player that you would be surprised by, or is it truly they're going to be best player available and there's really no read on them?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I don't think anything would really surprise me. I mean, there might be.
I like that. That's
Yeah,
fun.
there might be some profiles that you could eliminate for the Braves. Like I'm just scanning through. Like, would they take on a pitcher like Brody Brecht at Iowa, who has such huge strikes
I actually saw
questions?
he was mocked there by some, maybe it was MLB.com. Somebody had him mocked to the Braves like recently,
Yeah,
and I saw him.
I'm just like I haven't heard anything specifically on him in or out for Atlanta, but just looking at players who make sense in this range, like Hurston Waldrop was a better strike thrower than Brody Brecht, but if you wanted to compare those two, I think you probably could, and it wouldn't be crazy off base. So yeah, like looking at everyone who, like all the demographics I have on our board, everyone in like this 15 to 40 range, I can't imagine them like entirely out on any of these profiles. Like they haven't really taken, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I can't remember like a super huge strikeout question mark player they've taken in the first round. Like, would they go for a Dakota Jordan? I imagine Vance Honeycutt would be a different scenario if he slid all the way to 24, just given the profile, but that maybe is one.
Yeah, it's not
I'm
ringing a
not
bell,
entirely
but
sure.
and yeah, that makes sense. Actually kind of folds into this question that I was definitely going to ask you. I'm sure that everybody has their favorite guys, right? In any
Mm.
class, whether it's, you're doing your thoughts versus mock drafts is different too. People always have to know that big boards versus mock
Mhm.
drafts are different.
Yeah.
Is there a guy that could reasonably fall to 24 that's like one of your favorite players? Not even, again, not reporting, not a Braves thing. So
Mhm.
who would you like be in love with that could reasonably be there 24 if you were the Braves?
Yeah, I think the two most exciting players that have a chance to fall into this range and would be maybe Vance Honeycutt and Seaver King. Like I think the Braves are probably just on the outside of their realistic floor. Like it would be really odd to see a team like the Dodgers pass on Vance Honeycutt given how they valued athleticism and tools. But Honeycutt, I think tool for tool is like one or two in terms of upside potential in this draft class, but it's almost like a Garrett Mitchell situation. We had him ranked number 6 in his draft class. He fell to about 18 or so to the Brewers, just because of some hit power injury questions. Honeycutt doesn't really have the same power questions that Mitchell had. He has access his power a lot, but it's a lot of swing and miss. As soon as he's taken top 30, he will set the new like high for strikeout rate for college pitchers in the bonus pool era in this range, and I'm assuming he's going to go just because the defense is great, the speed is great. And then Seaver King at Wake Forest, he was a Division II player, came to Wake. He has electric hands in the box. He's a plus runner. He's played shortstop, center field, third base, second base, so he can play a bunch of premium positions. And I imagine whoever drafts him will start him at shortstop. That is maybe a separator for Seaver King in this class because there are not a ton of shortstops that you can look at and have confidence they'll stay at the position in this draft class. And like while both of their ranges, I think, start in the middle of the first round, there are enough players that are lumped into the same tier that it wouldn't be shocking for either of them to slip down to Atlanta. I'd be curious. Like, I haven't heard them tied
Yeah.
to the Braves just because most people assume they're going to be off the board. But I think those would be the most exciting players who I think have a reasonable chance to get there probably.
Yeah, I don't want to put you in a bad spot ever either. So it is what it is.
Yeah.
I made sure to couch that. That's not reporting. Just that's hope. That's the hopeful slam dunk grand slam thing there.
Yeah.
just, I just know that, it's not the same as what you do, but everyone seems to have their guys that they like, even if it's way down.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, do you have a deep guy that you like even like a second,
It's
third round
funny.
beyond guy that you like?
I have some really deep guys that I like, but this year more than ever, it's been like typically I have a player that I'm really high on. This year, for whatever reason, I haven't had a guy in this like day one range that I'm like really
That's like your
excited
guy in
about.
capital letters. Like, yeah.
Yeah, like I had Kevin Parada a few years ago, who was my guy like when he was in high school before he was a first rounder, he was good. Like I really do like and maybe this is a player who like every team's gonna have a chance for this guy, but Demarion Terrell is an outfielder out of Alabama. We've got him ranked as kind of like a third round talent. He's very raw as a hitter, but I love the tool set. And he actually drew some Michael Harris comparisons early this spring. That was kind of fascinating. I think he's more physical at the same time than Harris, more likely to be a corner profile in the outfield than a center fielder, but he has huge raw power, great bat speed, just really upside, like athlete toolsy pick. One of my favorite pitchers, and I actually have heard the Braves tied to this player specifically, so maybe this is probably the one I should have started with. But Levi Sterling, who we have ranked number 55 overall, he's a high school pitcher out of California. I think he is like this perfect starter traits projection arm who has like a really clean delivery, can spin the ball well, throws a changeup with conviction, some of the best strike throwing in the class. Like he has all the traits you love as a pitching prospect, but does not have the sort of now power, now stuff, which I mean, to me, I think is almost like beneficial for some of these guys. I kind of like the steady upwards velocity projection. He's got a great frame at 6'4", 190. I imagine he's going to go at some point on day one, potentially get overpaid in the second round. But that is a pitching prospect. And he's also younger for the class too. So he just has a lot of traits that I think are really strong positive indicators. And there have been a number of teams that are linked to him, but the Braves are one of those. So if the Braves take him, just given what he does now, how he pitches, that advanced feel for the game he has with the Braves track record of pitching development, I think that would be a really fun player team pairing. So that actually might be the best option for that question.
There you go. Circle him. I'm going to let you go. I have to ask this though. The Braves are, at least they have the reputation of really liking guys that are local or close to local or semi-local. Is there anybody in their like respective ranges that might be interesting? That's like a Georgia guy or a Georgia Ties guy. I know obviously Condon is not going to be available, but because is that an earned reputation? Like I always wonder if that's actually a thing that's real.
Yeah.
Like, so it is. Okay.
I think it is. Like we've looked at teams. I think the Braves have taken more prospects out of Georgia in like the day like 1 and 2 range than any team. And I think again, like a lot of that is probably because there are a lot of kids who grew up in Georgia who are Braves fans.
Georgia's a hotbed anyway of all this
yeah,
stuff. So that makes sense.
It's a hotbed. They have a great they have this region locked down in terms of like fandom. So I would imagine there are a lot of players who just the signability is more accessible for the Braves than other teams. And I think there is something to the fact that teams like to own their regions. Some teams care about this more than others, and the fact that the Braves are in, like you said, a hotbed, I think ups the ante for them in that region. But one guy I'll name, I think it's actually a pretty down year for Georgia and Florida specifically, if they have any of that kind of northern Florida territory as well. But Conrad Kaysen is a guy who is an obvious connection to the Braves. He is in Atlanta. He's a shortstop and a right-handed pitcher, so he's got that two-way factor. He's really athletic. I think most teams probably prefer him on the mound at this point, but he's got real tools as a position player. So he's one I would just kind of throw out there again. Not a player that I've specifically heard linked to the Braves, but given their track record, background, player profiles they've liked, it would make sense to me if they were more in on him than maybe some other teams were. And we have him as like a top 5 round talent at this point.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone's all Braves fans are like, all right, who's the guy that lives in the Atlanta area that they can draft at some point in the first couple of days?
Where's the Parkview High School product that we have? So Cade Brown, maybe I'll throw him out.
There you go.
Parkview product.
We're tied. We are growing in number. Anyway, well, thanks for doing this, man. I appreciate it. I told you to keep it short. We're going to do that. What would you like to plug? Anything? Obviously, you don't need me to plug you, but it's a big week for you. Obviously, there's a lot going on over there, Baseball America. So,
yeah, I just plug Baseball America in general. That's where all my work is found. And anyone who supports the site, whether you listen to our podcast or subscribe to the website, you really allow us to do what we do. So if you're interested in this conversation, you're interested in BA in general, you thought about taking the plunge in the past for a sub, but you haven't. This month is really as good as any. We've got updated top 100, updated top 30s for every team before the trade deadline happening. So if you want to know like the most updated reports on prospects that the Braves may be trading for or trading away. That might be useful for you. And then we've got a ton of draft stuff that's already on the site and will be coming over the next week. So I just plug BA in general.
Yeah, definitely would recommend subscribing to Baseball America. Fantastic stuff all year long, not just now. We should emphasize it's not just now, but it would be very helpful right now. I think if you had a Baseball America sub, if you're someone like me that doesn't know anything, that's the way to learn. Like, do your crash course the last week is to check out. Yeah, that's a way to do that. I just trust Carlos. Whatever he tells me, I'm going to listen to. Thank you for doing this, man. I sincerely appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brett.
My pleasure. As for everybody else, please subscribe to this show anywhere you might find podcasts, and we'll see you all next time.